Today's case is about love, control, and the silence that can hide unthinkable truths. Karen Swift was the kind of woman who brightened every room she entered. Her generous spirit touched everyone around her, especially her 4 children, who were the center of her world. She had a natural ability to make others feel seen, often putting their needs before her own. Karen found joy in simple things: family, friendship, and knowing the people she loved were safe and cared for. At an early age, she met David Swift. He was quiet and reserved, a contrast to Karen's outgoing and social personality. But despite their differences, something between them worked. While Karen thrived in conversation and community, David preferred to stay in the background. Over time, their relationship deepened, and they began building a future together. On September 23, 1989, they got married and settled in Dyersburg, Tennessee. For a while, their life seemed stable, built around raising a family and navigating the routines of small-town living. But about 10 years into their seemingly perfect marriage, things began to unravel. Karen discovered that David was having an affair, leading to a separation that lasted several months. Still, they found their way back to each other. And from the outside, the Swifts seemed to have navigated the challenges that had once threatened their marriage. They maintained an active social life with a close circle of friends and enjoyed cordial relationships with their neighbors. However, beneath the surface, tensions were quietly building around Karen's newer friendships. In early 2010, Karen had formed a close bond with Bill and Kathy Bona, a couple whose approach to life differed significantly from what David considered appropriate. The Bonas were social butterflies who enjoyed hosting gatherings, attending concerts, and embracing what they saw as the lighter side of life. They believed in letting loose and having fun, attitudes that drew Karen to them during a time when she may have been feeling constrained by the responsibilities of family life. David viewed the Bonas with suspicion and growing resentment. He saw them as negative influences, encouraging Karen to make choices he believed were harmful to her well-being and their family's stability. To him, Bill and Kathy embodied everything he considered inappropriate for a mother of 4. The Bonas too had their own opinions about David. To them, he came across as controlling, someone who seemed uncomfortable with Karen's growing independence. They felt she deserved more freedom, more space to be herself beyond the constant routines of home and motherhood. On the evening of October 29, 2011, Karen attended a Halloween party hosted by Bill and Kathy. The party was everything Karen had hoped for, a chance to unwind and enjoy herself in the company of friends who appreciated her lively personality. She had even arranged to spend the night at the Bonas home, having secured their permission to avoid the late-night drive. However, the evening took an unexpected turn just after midnight when her daughter Ashley, who was also spending the night away from home, called feeling homesick and asked her mom to come pick her up. Despite her desire to continue enjoying the party, she couldn't bring herself to disappoint her daughter, no matter how much she had been looking forward to her rare night of freedom. She left the party, picked up Ashley, and arrived home around 2 in the morning on October 30th. When David awoke around 10 o'clock that morning, he immediately noticed something unusual. Karen was nowhere to be found. She wasn't in their bedroom, she wasn't with the children, and her car was missing from the driveway. Given that she had returned home just 8 hours earlier, her absence was both puzzling and concerning. David's immediate response was to contact the police and report Karen as missing. However, when officers took his statement, they discovered David wasn't the first person to report Karen's disappearance. Bill and Kathy had also contacted authorities. When Karen left the party the previous night, she had promised to text them first thing in the morning. When those texts never arrived and Karen failed to respond to their calls and messages, the Bonas had grown worried enough to file their own missing person report. The fact that 2 separate parties had independently reported Karen's disappearance immediately elevated the case's priority. On the morning of October 30th, a local hunter contacted authorities after spotting a white Nissan Murano, abandoned along Millsfield Highway in northern Dyer County, just a quarter-mile from the Swift family home. When investigators arrived, David was already at the scene. He had unlocked the vehicle and looked inside for Karen's belongings, her purse, keys, or cell phone. But her phone was missing. When police officers examined the car, they made several disturbing discoveries. The driver's seat was positioned in a way that suggested the last person to drive the vehicle was taller than Karen. One of the tires was completely flat, and closer inspection revealed that a screw had been deliberately driven into it, rather than picked up accidentally while driving. There were no signs of violence inside the vehicle, no blood, torn clothing, or any evidence of a struggle. Investigators also uncovered that just 3 weeks before her disappearance, Karen had filed for divorce from David. The timing alone was enough to raise questions about motive, but the circumstances surrounding the filing were even more revealing. Unable to afford legal representation on her own, Karen had borrowed $2,000 from Bill and Kathy to cover the costs associated with the divorce proceedings. The bonus had also provided her with a second phone, presumably to allow her to communicate with her attorney without David's knowledge. These actions suggested that Karen had been planning her departure from the marriage carefully and discreetly. Even more concerning was Karen's apparent fear of David's reaction to the divorce papers. She had confided in the bonus that she was afraid to be home when he received them, indicating that she expected him to respond with violence or extreme anger. To avoid this confrontation, Bill and Kathy had invited Karen to join them on a trip out of town, effectively removing her from potential danger until David had time to process the news. Karen and her daughters had spent a week with the bonus, returning home on October 17th. Despite her fears and the precautions she had taken, she had been living in the same house as David for the 2 weeks leading up to her disappearance. Investigators considered 3 primary scenarios for Karen's departure. The first possibility was that she had voluntarily left the house for some unknown reason, though this seemed unlikely given the hour and circumstances. The second was that someone had broken into the house and abducted her, without waking David or the children, which also seemed improbable. The third possibility, and the one that investigators found most compelling, was that David himself was responsible for Karen's disappearance. The authorities invited David in for questioning. Before the interrogation even began, he complained about knee surgery he had recently undergone, emphasizing his physical limitations and inability to have committed any violent act. Throughout the interrogation, David portrayed Karen as someone who had been led astray by the bonus, describing behavior he considered inappropriate and troubling. He pointed to Kathy's master's degree in psychology, suggesting she had influenced Karen's thinking in a negative way. He also blamed her for encouraging excessive drinking and partying, including claims that Karen had engaged in behavior he described as sexually inappropriate. One incident, David alleged, occurred after Kathy's birthday party at the local country club. The celebration had continued at the bonus house, where several friends, including Karen, drank heavily and got into the backyard hot tub without clothes. At some point, Karen disappeared from view. A friend, Robin Alfred, went inside to look for her. According to Robin, she found Karen unconscious and unclothed on the couch, with Bilbona already in the room. Robin later told David she intervened, covering Karen with towels and stopping Bill from taking advantage of her. David claimed that this confirmed his fears about the bonus influence, and said he urged Karen to distance herself from them after that night. While investigators later confirmed that some social gatherings had indeed taken place, where friends had used the hot tub without swimwear, they found David's interpretation of these events to be highly subjective. According to friends familiar with the Swifts and the bonus, casual hot tub gatherings weren't unusual among their friend group. It was apparently common for friends to join in wearing only their bra and underwear, or sometimes nothing at all, when swimsuits weren't available. Bill and Kathy also gave their own account of the situation David had pointed to, of Bill trying to take advantage of Karen. According to them, after a night of drinking, Karen had fallen asleep at their home. She wasn't wearing any clothes and had passed out before getting dressed. Bill said he simply placed a towel over her. Both he and Kathy firmly denied that anything inappropriate had happened and rejected any suggestion that Bill had tried to take advantage of her. Still, David viewed the situation differently. As the interrogation was wrapping up, one of the investigators posed a question, saying, "Let's take this into consideration. What if she left with somebody? How are you going to take that?" The mood shifted immediately. David grew emotional, his voice unsteady as tears began to fall. "Still crying," he responded. I just want her to come home and be a mother. If she doesn't want to be a wife, that's her decision. I can accept that." Then, after a pause, he added softly, "If there's someone else, I just hope they're not hurtful or harmful." With David firmly established as the primary suspect, investigators began examining his background and the history of his relationship with Karen. What they discovered was a pattern of controlling and potentially violent behavior that dated back years. Although they had separated in 1999 because of David's affair, what brought them back together was far from a simple reconciliation. According to text messages Karen sent to friends, David had threatened to kill himself if she didn't come back. And this wasn't just a dramatic outburst. He had reportedly held a gun to his head and threatened to pull the trigger unless she agreed to give their marriage another chance. Friends described David as increasingly controlling as the years passed. He would call Karen repeatedly when she was out with friends, demanding to know her location, who she was with, and when she planned to return home. If she didn't answer his calls, he would continue calling obsessively, sometimes placing 25 calls in a 30-minute period. According to a neighbor who lived close to the bonus, David even went as far as asking to spend time in their yard so he could keep an eye on Bill and Kathy's house. It became increasingly clear that his watch over Karen wasn't just protective, it was possessive. David was called back to the station for yet another interview. By this time, he had spoken with detectives several times about the last night he saw Karen, and each time his account had changed slightly. In one version, he said he didn't actually see her, but only spoke to her from the top of the stairs. In another, he claimed he did see her, though he wasn't sure what she was wearing. Eventually, he gave a more detailed version, saying he saw her clearly in the kitchen, wearing a pair of blue jeans with holes and a gray coat. Their interaction, he said, had been brief, just a few words exchanged before she left again. As the interview wrapped up, David asked about the progress of the investigation. Detectives told him they were still searching, and the search would go on for months. Then came a major discovery. 2 cell phones were eventually discovered, Karen's main Verizon wireless device and a second phone known as the Voyager, which had been gifted to her by Bill and Kathy. Both phones were found in a wooded area, just 145 feet off Harness Road. The location sat between the spot where Karen's abandoned vehicle had been found and the Swift family home. The phone data raised even more questions. Investigators learned that David had installed a signal extender in the home, a device designed to boost cell reception, especially useful in rural areas like Dyersburg in 2011. Whenever a phone connected to the extender, it would automatically register that connection in the system's log. According to those logs, Karen's main phone reconnected to the home's signal booster shortly after she got home from the Halloween party with Ashley, around 2 in the morning. It stayed connected for about 2 hours before going out of range at roughly 20 minutes to 5. Around 30 minutes later, the phone went completely offline. It disconnected from all networks and was never turned back on. When investigators eventually found it, the device had been damaged, possibly crushed or smashed along the same road where Karen's SUV had been discovered. But it was the second phone, the Voyager, that added another layer to the. It didn't connect to the home extender until almost 10 in the morning, more than 5 hours after Karen's first phone had gone offline. Around that time, someone used it to check a voicemail. Afterward, the device, like Karen's main phone, ended up discarded in the woods. According to Bill and Kathy, they had given Karen the Voyager so she could communicate privately with her divorce attorney. But the activity that morning, especially the timeline, raised more questions than answers. The investigation took another turn on November 14th, when police seized David's computer. What they found in his internet history was troubling. Just days after Karen filed for divorce, he had already started browsing dating websites. It began on October 10th, the very day she served him the papers. And it wasn't a one-time visit. David kept returning to those sites, both before and after Karen disappeared. The fact that he was actively seeking romantic connections while his wife was missing painted the picture of a man who wasn't just unbothered by her disappearance, but had been preparing for her absence. Investigators also discovered inconsistencies in David's claims about his physical limitations. Throughout both interrogations, he had emphasized his recent knee surgery and his need for crutches, suggesting that his physical condition made it impossible for him to have harmed Karen. However, witnesses reported seeing David performing physically demanding work just days before Karen's disappearance. The day before the Halloween party, David had helped a friend with farm work, lifting and carrying 65-pound hay bales without apparent difficulty. Kathy had also observed David that weekend and noted that he seemed to move around quite easily when he thought no one was watching, despite his claims of requiring crutches for mobility. When police consulted with David's doctor, they learned that while he had indeed suffered a minor knee injury, it was not severe enough to require crutches or to significantly limit his mobility. This suggested David was faking his injuries to appear incapable of harming Karen. The search for Karen involved extensive community participation, with volunteers combing through local areas and law enforcement deploying cadaver dogs along rivers and waterways. On December 10th, nearly 6 weeks after Karen's disappearance, her body was found in a cemetery, not buried in a grave, but rather deposited on the grounds as if someone had simply left her there. Karen's body was found naked except for her underwear, which was positioned around her thighs. An examination determined that her underwear had likely been pulled down as a result of her body being dragged from the gravel pathway through the cemetery to the spot where she was found. It did not appear to be the place where Karen had died, but rather where she had been moved after the attack. The autopsy revealed that Karen had died from blunt force trauma to the head, injuries consistent with being struck by a heavy object. The nature of her injuries indicated that the attack had been violent and deliberate, eliminating any possibility that her death had been accidental. The toxicology report showed that Karen had Benadryl, Tylenol, and caffeine in her system at the time of her death, but no illegal drugs or alcohol. However, despite the mounting evidence against David, investigators faced a significant challenge. Everything they had was circumstantial. While the pattern of controlling behavior, the suspicious timeline, the computer searches, and the fabricated injury all pointed to David's guilt, there was no physical evidence directly linking him to Karen's murder. For 11 years, the case remained officially unsolved, though investigators maintained that they continued to work on it actively. David moved to Alabama with his 2 daughters. In 2014, he met a woman named Kelly, and by May 2016, the two were married. But that relationship also ended in divorce. However, back in Tennessee, Karen's case became a campaign issue during the election for district attorney. On August 8, 2022, 11 years after Karen's murder, David was arrested and charged with premeditated first-degree murder. He was released on a $200,000 bond. In July 2023, David's bond was revoked after he was accused of felony stalking in Alabama. Allegedly, he had been stalking his now ex-wife. The trial began on May 28, 2024, more than 12 years after Karen's death. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the pattern of circumstantial evidence that had been building for over a decade. They painted a picture of a controlling husband who had been unable to accept his wife's desire for independence and had ultimately killed her rather than allow her to leave him. An interesting detail that emerged during the case involved a neighbor named John, who had a troubling history with Karen and Bill, particularly involving their dog. Karen once walked over to John's house and casually asked if he had seen anything unusual or knew anything about their dog's sudden illness. While there, she noticed a pan of food left out near the property, food that appeared tampered with. Karen later told David that the dish had a strange residue on it, something clearly inedible. Alarmed, she rushed home and insisted that their dog might have ingested poison. The couple quickly took the pet to the vet, where, fortunately, it survived after receiving urgent treatment. It wasn't the first time John had allegedly harmed animals in the neighborhood, and while there was no direct evidence linking him to Karen's murder, the incident painted a disturbing picture. In November 2011, during the investigation into Karen's disappearance, John was arrested and charged with aggravated animal cruelty. He eventually pled guilty. But when he was called to testify at David's murder trial in 2024, John attempted to downplay the situation. He claimed it had all been a misunderstanding, saying he had put out fly bait to deal with an insect problem caused by construction debris near his home, and that the dogs had accidentally gotten into it. Under questioning, John admitted that he hadn't spoken directly to the Swifts about the incident and insisted that he didn't even know what their dog looked like. Yet, despite these gaps in his memory, he offered unusually specific claims about David's behavior around the time of Karen's disappearance. He said he remembered seeing David using crutches outside one evening, but then suddenly walking without them once he believed no one was watching. John also claimed that later that night, he noticed an odd smell coming from David's home. Odd enough that he went to a friend's house to mention it. The defense argued that all the evidence against David was circumstantial. They said his behavior might have seemed odd, but it didn't prove he was guilty of murder. While they hinted there could be other explanations for Karen's death, they didn't offer a strong alternative. After a day and a half of deliberation, the jury delivered its decision. David was found not guilty of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and second-degree murder. But they couldn't agree on the charge of voluntary manslaughter, so the judge declared a mistrial on that count. This meant David was still not completely cleared in connection with Karen's death. Just 2 weeks later, a grand jury indicted him again, this time for voluntary manslaughter and aggravated assault, opening the door to a possible retrial. David's lawyers tried to get the new charges dismissed, claiming the statute of limitations had already run out. But the judge denied that motion, and plans for a second trial moved forward. The prospect of another trial raised questions. In Tennessee, the minimum sentence for voluntary manslaughter is 3 years. But David had already spent nearly 2 years in jail awaiting his first trial. So if he were convicted, he might be released based on time already served. Karen's family continued to advocate for justice, but they also faced the difficult reality that the legal system might not be able to provide the closure they sought.